President Trump says an agreement has been reached for the complete disarmament of Hamas in Gaza. In a post on Truth Social, the American president announced that the Board of Peace, so that's an organization the US administration set up to oversee a Gaza ceasefire, that Board of Peace had reached an agreement on the most difficult part of the negotiations. One, the disarmament of Hamas, and two, the withdrawal of Israeli forces. Now, Hamas has confirmed it has agreed to a deal addressing its weapons, but Israel has not yet publicly endorsed the agreement. That means there are still major questions over exactly which weapons would be surrendered, how the process will be verified, and how long it would take. President Trump says the agreement will be implemented in phases. Israeli forces would withdraw as Hamas disarms, and an international force and new Palestinian police would take responsibility for security in Gaza. Here's a look at his post on Truth Social. He wrote, "This agreement is a critical step towards Gaza finally being governed by a new Palestinian government that will work closely with the Board of Peace to help the Palestinian people. At the same time, Israel will have the security it deserves, with Gaza no longer used as a base for terror attacks." Now, this is all happening 9 months since a US-brokered ceasefire began in Gaza and after months of marathon talks. And all the while, more than 2 million Palestinians in Gaza are still living in devastating humanitarian conditions. I'm going to be discussing what all this means with Fawaz Gerges, an expert on the Middle East, US foreign policy and international relations, in just a moment. But first, let's go straight to Jerusalem and speak to DW correspondent Tania Kramer to get a sense of what the reactions are in Israel to Trump's disarmament plan. So, Tania, Trump says Hamas has agreed to disarm, yet Hamas is seen as a terrorist group not only by Israel, also by dozens of other countries, including the EU and the US. So does the Israeli government believe Hamas when it says it will disarm?
Well, I think what we can say for certain is there's no trust between the two sides. This has been mediated by those partners, and after the October 7 terror attacks on southern Israel and the ensuing war in Gaza that left over 70,000 Palestinians in Gaza killed and devastated the territory there. But what we heard from an American official here, this is not based on trust, but basically very closely coordinated with also the Israeli side. But again, you know, it's important to say that as with any of these agreements that we've seen in the past years, we have to look into the fine print and also into the whether they will be actually implemented. And I think what we are seeing here again, there's no, as you already mentioned, no clear timeline given. But we heard from the High Representative of the Board of Peace, Nikolai Mladenov. He said that decommissioning will need to be in lockstep with Israeli withdrawal. This is very important to see. He said also, quote, "What the agreement says matters, but what happens next matters even more as to the next element and elements that need to be implemented." Aside from the decommissioning of arms and the Israeli withdrawal from the territory, which has been, you know, one of the major sticking points between Hamas and Israel. As you mentioned, there needs to be the international stabilization force, needs to be established. They need to come into Gaza. This is unclear when this will happen. Also, the technocrat committee needs to be allowed to come to Gaza by Israel. They're currently still in Cairo, and also we're talking about obviously security. A police force would have to be trained that would take over security. So all these elements are not still in place, and it will all matter whether this will be implemented.
So obviously an awful lot of details, but before we even get to the fine print, as you say, Tania, very clearly in Trump's statement, he says Israeli forces would withdraw from Gaza once disarmament is completed. Yet there are members, 2 senior members of Israel's government who are currently under sanctions for repeatedly inciting violence against Palestinian communities. they have made clear that they want Israel to settle all of Gaza. So how can a government that comprises attitudes like that ever even think about agreeing to a plan like this?
Yeah, that is actually a good question. And this idea of establishing or re-establishing civilian Israeli settlements in Gaza, they're considered illegal under international law, is actually not such an isolated, opinion among members of this current Israeli government. But we have heard from Israeli Prime Minister that he rejects this idea. But again, there's a lot of pushing, from his coalition partners to just do so. But I have to say, what I think everybody is agreeing in this government, and also across, party lines, also in the opposition, is that this war goal of what Prime Minister Netanyahu was described as eliminating Hamas is still, the focus of all of this. And what we have seen after the war is that Hamas has actually managed to reassert its power, at least in the smaller part of Gaza that is still under its control. Now, Israel is controlling up to, or is aiming to control up to 70% of the Gaza Strip. We have now a divided territory. And, this basically shows how complicated, also how complex this whole situation is. But we have heard from reactions already, from the national minister of from this Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, far-right minister, that the only solution to this is encouraging immigration, he means from Gaza, and destroying Hamas. But we also heard from some opposition members, Avigdor Lieberman, also a right-wing politician. He says Hamas must be eliminated and not to come back to the situation before October 7. There should not be an agreement made with Hamas.
So huge pressure on Netanyahu from his own government, and yet also pressure on Netanyahu from the US. I mean, US officials are saying, and I'm quoting here, that Trump will be very disappointed if Israel does not agree, does not withdraw from Gaza. So talk to us a little bit about the position that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in, what his options are right now. I mean, especially given he's also facing elections in October, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something we really have to mention. I mean, I'm very sure his opponents will pick up on this. This is a major topic also in the elections, because, he has always stated this goal of completely eliminating, as he put it, Hamas in Gaza. And clearly this is not the case. Obviously, it will depend on the pressure that he will face from US President Donald Trump on this. But I think unless we really see those pictures, videos coming out from Gaza with Hamas decommissioning its arms, it will be a very difficult time for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But at the same time, there's also really no timeline given for this. And observers have said, this could really take a long time. You're already hearing there also from different sides, hearing that there are already disagreements over the wording when this will be implemented. And I think this is, what we have to look at, because maybe there might be some sort of symbolic withdrawal from the Israeli military. We simply don't know. All is given, we don't know when and how this will be implemented.
Tania, we'll leave it there. Tania Kramer in Jerusalem, thank you so much. OK, before we get some analysis from a Middle East expert on the disarmament deal, let's take a closer look at the situation in Gaza since the ceasefire deal came into effect on October the 10th last year. Now, Palestinian authorities say that more than 1,100 people have been killed in Israeli attacks since the ceasefire deal. The UN Human Rights Office reported just this month that it had verified 685 of those deaths, including the killing of 283 women and children. It is working on verifying other cases. Now, Israeli forces remain in control of large parts of Gaza, as you can see in this map that we're showing you. The yellow line you can see marks the position Israeli forces were meant to hold under the ceasefire agreement that left Israel in control of roughly 53% of the territory. Now, the thick orange line you can see just inside of the yellow line, that shows the latest boundary issued by Israel to humanitarian organizations. For anyone who wants to cross that line, they require coordination. That requires coordination with the Israeli military. Now, the latest orange line, dated June 23rd, that covers almost 65% of Gaza. Now, media reports say Israeli troops have moved up to that line. So let's talk about this with a man who knows a lot about what's going on in the Middle East. Fawaz Gerges is an expert on the Arab-Israeli conflict and on American foreign policy towards the Muslim world. He's a professor of Middle Eastern politics and international relations at the London School of Economics. Fawaz, great to see you. Thank you for joining us on this day in which Donald Trump announced Hamas has agreed to complete disarmament. He called it a historic agreement, a monumental step towards lasting peace and security. But then we have Hamas talking about placing its weapons under the control of a Palestinian body. So the question is, I mean, are they actually describing the same agreement here?
I don't think so. I think President Trump does not really care for details. It's not a detailed decision-making process. He wanted to declare victory, and he did. Yes, we know that the devil lies in the details. The devil lies in the implementation. Just this morning, a top Hamas official made it very clear that every single clause of the agreement has to be agreed upon with Israel. He said that Hamas will monitor how the agreement is implemented and the mechanisms to implement this agreement, how and when. And both sides, Israel and Hamas, disagree on the fundamentals. Which comes first? Hamas surrendering its weapons or Israel pulling out of the 60% of the Israeli territories that it controls? So even though the Board of Peace said that a detailed roadmap has been agreed upon, there's still some major disagreements between Israel and Hamas, and the so-called basically disarmament roadmap will take up to a year. So you can imagine what could happen, what might happen between now and a year from now when the process of implementation takes place.
So let's talk about some of those details that you're saying President Trump doesn't like very much. What would genuine Hamas disarmament have to involve?
Well, I think this is the big question, really, Anja. You're putting your finger on the fundamental question and challenge facing not only Gaza and the future of the Palestinians, but the future of Gaza and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I think Hamas has already agreed to surrender its weapons to a Palestinian National Committee or a technical committee under the leadership of the United Nations. But Hamas insists that a Palestinian governing committee takes place. So Hamas won't surrender its weapons to either the Board of Peace or Israel. It wants a genuine Palestinian government in place, governing authority. Israel does not really want any Palestinian authority, neither in the West Bank nor in Gaza. So a genuine disarmament of Hamas requires the establishment of a Palestinian authority under the leadership of the so-called Board of Peace. And yet we don't really have a Palestinian authority. We don't really have an agreement on the parameters of the disarmament question. Israel insists not only that Hamas and other groups be disarmed, Israel insists that Gaza be demilitarized. And Israel has not committed itself to pulling out of the 60% that occupies in Gaza before the disarmament and demilitarization of both Hamas and Gaza.
It is an extraordinarily complicated situation. If we just focus on the demilitarization and if that does happen, there would need to be verification. You were just talking about a UN Palestinian governing committee, essentially a Palestinian authority. Is that kind of body would verify or confirm that Hamas had surrendered all of its weapons, not to mention closing its tunnels, dismantling its military infrastructure, obviously a huge process. Who could verify that?
It's the board of peace, because the board of peace now is in charge, even though the board of peace has not really been allowed to enter Gaza by Israel till now. So the board of peace, the members of the board of peace are basically based in Egypt, as opposed to be in Gaza. Because Israel so far, even though it has made a decision a few days ago to allow members of the board of peace to enter Gaza almost a year after the ceasefire. So it's the members of the board of peace, which is an international organization, of course, under the leadership of the Trump administration, that will monitor the implementation of the disarmament, not only of Hamas, but other Palestinian groups, including Islamic Jihad. But before we reach this particular point, Anja, neither Hamas nor Israel basically see eye to eye on what comes first. Hamas will not disarm unless Israel commits itself to pulling out of the 60% of its occupation zone of Gaza. Israel will not pull out of the 60% that it occupies in Gaza before complete disarmament and demilitarization of Gaza. So this is the challenge, this is the deadlock. And so far, what we have seen does not really address the deadlock, because the Hamas leadership, as I mentioned earlier, the top Hamas members said that every step has to be agreed upon, surrendering weapons for Israel's withdrawal. But I doubt it very much whether Israel will ever pull out of Gaza. In fact, not only Israel now occupies 60% of Gaza, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered the military to expand the occupation zone to 70%, as opposed to 50% when the ceasefire was signed. So it tells you, I mean, Israel's occupation of Gaza has increased by 20%, as opposed to really somehow Israel prepares itself to pulling out of Gaza.
And there are, of course, members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government who want Israel to take control of the whole of Gaza, for Israelis to move into Gaza. And obviously that puts Benjamin Netanyahu in a difficult situation here, with pressure from both sides. Can we just talk about how the position that Hamas holds on the ground in Gaza at the moment? I mean, how much control does it still have in the areas that are still outside of Israeli military control?
So, I mean, let's give our viewers a kind of a sketch of what we're talking about. That Israel controls between 60 and 70%. Let's say 60%. So Hamas really controls about 40% of the remaining territories of Gaza. What you have is, Hamas does control the 40%. I mean, not total control, but I mean, control, because of its security forces, because of its police forces, and because of the institutions that it has over the years, over the past since 2007. But what we have in Gaza is a catastrophic humanitarian situation. The humanitarian aid, the amount of humanitarian aid stipulated by the ceasefire have never been delivered. So you have a water crisis, you have a food crisis, you have a basic food crisis. In particular, the water crisis is really quite very severe. Not to mention the fact that Israel basically attacks Gaza on almost daily basis. 1,100 Palestinians have been killed, according to Palestinian authorities, since the ceasefire was signed, as your report has shown. And yesterday, just yesterday, Thursday, Israel killed 6 Palestinians, including 2 children. So there is no security, there is no ceasefire, there is what I call a low-intensity war, as opposed to really all-out war. And the humanitarian situation, according to UN officials, is truly catastrophic. But in terms of security, Hamas almost controls 40% of Gaza, which is not under Israeli occupation.
So given everything that we've been talking about, given the humanitarian situation, and given, as you say, Israel continues to strike and more Palestinians are being killed, can any kind of disarmament process credibly take place under these conditions?
I doubt it very much, sadly and tragically. I don't think there's a light at the end of the tunnel in Gaza at this particular stage. I think we know very well that President Trump is the only leader in the world who could really exert pressure on Israeli Prime Minister to begin the process of pulling out of Gaza. And this is a major political capital. My take on it is that the reason why President Trump announced the deal last night, because I think he has some leverage over Benjamin Netanyahu because of the Iran war, that President Trump could really exert pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to begin the process or even to commit himself to the timetable, even though this is really one of the most hardline government in Israel's history. And as you suggested, some members of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu officials, they really want to ethnic cleanse Gaza. They want to expel the Palestinians and they want to resettle Gaza. So all in all, it seems to me, without a political vision, without the United States really intervening actively, pressuring Benjamin Netanyahu, I don't see a way out. Even though Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey are exerting a lot of pressure on Hamas, Hamas is in a very, very difficult position. Hamas faces an existential crisis. Hamas really now is struggling to survive. And that's why Hamas has made some major concessions to surrender its weapon, to give up its government to a future alternative Palestinian authority. But my take on it is that Israel will never, and I say never, pull out of Gaza in the near future. I'm talking about 5 or 6 or 7 years from now, because Israel now subscribes to a strategic doctrine of absolute security, occupying lands, whether it's in Gaza or Lebanon and Syria, to provide absolute security for its citizens. So it goes beyond Gaza. This is the new security doctrine in Israel after the 7th of October, after Hamas attacks on Israel on the 7th of October 2023.
So after the big announcement from President Trump on Truth Social, would you say that we're really actually not in a different situation than we were yesterday?
No, I mean, if you ask me, Anja, what do I really look for? I look for the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Have humanitarian aid, various amounts of aid reach Gaza? Has the lives of Palestinians improved? Is there security? Has the war ended? Does Israel strike Gaza on almost daily basis? Is there a Palestinian authority, alternative Palestinian authority that could take over from Hamas, which Hamas has agreed to? At the end of the day, there are so many questions and there are no answers to these questions. And I think the big question here, the what I call the macro question, the big question is that the war in Iran has widened and expanded everywhere now. Whether you're talking about the Gulf, Iraq, Jordan, even Egypt, a drone attacked Dumyat yesterday. And I think without de-escalation, without a political vision, without really ending the American war, with Iran, I doubt it very much whether we're going to see any de-escalation, either in Gaza or in Lebanon, or even the Israel security zone in Syria.
Okay. Fawaz Gerges, we'll have to leave it there. Professor of Middle Eastern Politics and International Relations at the London School of Economics. Fawaz, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So what do you think? Does President Trump's Board of Peace have any serious chance of bringing peace to the Middle East, or is this all just talk? Let us know in the comments. I'm Anja Kueppers-McKinnon. Thank you for watching. See you soon.